Okay, we'll call this Land Use Committee meeting to order at 7:30.
Land use.
Land Use Committee. I show present are Carrie, John Clausen, Sean, Mayor, myself, Scott Diener. All right, first item is Downtown Overlay District.
Okay, in particular, this map before us is a picture of the Bethel corridor from basically Kentucky Fried Chicken down up to the roundabout. And after Nick and I had a meeting with Mansour a couple weeks ago, and it was really apparent that he's not going to be the catalyst for having multi-family development. I think we're going to need to create activity somewhere else. So one of the ideas that we have is we believe there's opportunity along this, and particularly the east side of that road. You have basically a valley there. You could have multifamily units in there, potentially 4 or 5 story buildings, and then it'd be tucked down into the valley. It's kind of a depressed area there. Currently, it's zoned commercial. I think the idea would be to change that to mixed use. Am I speaking out of turn there?
Yeah, sorry I'm late. The clock downstairs is slower than this one. The idea would be to create a new mixed-use designation that would differ from our existing only in that it allowed more height and more density than the current mixed-use zone. So we'd have like a mixed-use 1 and a mixed-use 2. And then that mixed-use 2 where greater heights could be accommodated because of topography would be, we'd kind of figure out where that could potentially be located. And
So it was, the idea has been that we need 400 or 500 more people to support the businesses that we have down there for the economic activity we're trying to create. This particular corridor, well, it's not right in downtown, so it's within walking distance of the pedestrian pathway, the ferry, and the pedestrian amenities that we're creating.
And I don't know if you mentioned our meeting.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, it just, he's got ideas that he's consistent in his theme. We need a university downtown. We need Starbucks, or we need a Trader Joe's. And, Starbucks and Trader Joe's are going to come to markets when there's sufficient head counts in those marketplaces.
But not mixed use.
Probably not, but they could be. It might happen somewhere else within a distance of these.
Right.
I mean, the Harbor Greens is in Gig Harbor. It's not Trader Joe's, but it's a similar concept. A high-end grocer is part of a mixed-use development there in Gig Harbor. It's successful.
Yeah,
So I wouldn't dismiss it. A grocer couldn't be part of a mixed-use development. I'm not saying it's probably not in this corridor. This is probably more housing.
Mm-hmm.
and I would actually, potentially break this area into 2 pieces with the kind of the northern half of the area below the existing commercial development is at the bottom of a big ravine, and that ravine gets less the further up that way you go. And so you could include the entire corridor from Mile Hill to Bay Street, or just the lower portion that's more recessed into the landscape.
So you were saying mixed use 1, mixed use 2, so different densities or different heights? As
Different
well?
densities and heights.
Okay.
And so the mixed use 2 would have a little bit more density, and I don't know what the appropriate height would be and what the community is comfortable with, but looking at the topo lines on here, which are I think 5-foot intervals, I mean the hillside there is at least 50 feet. So potentially a 60 or 70-foot building isn't going to stick out a whole lot relative to the surrounding areas in higher elevation.
And so you're just looking for a nod to move forward on looking into this?
Yeah, and
Okay.
is this something that you're interested in exploring? And really it's a 2-step process. Number 1, we create the zone, and then Number two, legislatively amend the zoning map and apply it in different locations of the city, which this could be sort of a pilot area, would be this North Bethel, if you were to go there. But developing the regulation isn't difficult. We already have a parking standard that requires a certain number of parking stalls per unit of housing, depending on the number of bedrooms, and I think it's 1.5 for a one-bedroom apartment, and then it's 1.8 for a two, and it's 2 parking spaces for a 3-bedroom apartment. So that already exists. It's really just widening the table and inserting a new zone, and it's going to check all the same use boxes as the existing mixed-use zone, but it'll have different height and density limits.
I think that's where it is more.
I guess I would have one question about the parking. I appreciate it's completely separate, but to me that seems like an outdated requirement.
Well, and the parking code that exists today does give discretion to the director for adjustments up to 50% if a parking study can demonstrate that a lesser standard is needed. So there is some flexibility there. But yeah, I would agree that that's a little bit outdated, and especially given the proximity to transit, and if the pedestrian path is in and people can get to either Annapolis or the downtown foot ferry.
I know Bremerton's got a standard related to a transit center in their downtown that has different standards because of those pedestrian amenities. And do we want to consider looking at those, whether that's appropriate too?
To me, I think we should, kind of citywide, because I think, like I said, the standard that we have now is kind of outdated, and I know the big push is trans-area development type projects, and I think there needs to be some kind of a consideration given to a project that could meet whatever the requirements would be, so.
And we could probably reach out to some of these jurisdictions that have recently created,
Yeah.
multifamily, and you just see kind of the updated statistics with
There
the younger generations maybe not driving as much. It's just kind of see what the parking impacts are.
There was a major region-wide study called the Right Size Parking Study, where they actually went out at midnight and did counts at apartment complexes to see what the utilization rates were versus the parking standards. And so they have data from the entire Puget Sound region looking at places, down in Federal Way to downtown Seattle, and comparing utilization of parking garages, so that developers construct exactly the right amount of parking rather than having to provide a surplus that sits vacant. So that data exists, and it's something that we can look at.
You want to bring that to the next future land use committee meeting?
Potentially, yeah. I think.
I think it's kind of a separate thing from this.
Yep,
It is, but I think that's
It
another
is.
issue that
It is.
needs to be looked at.
The apartment building built on Sedgwick doesn't have pedestrian amenities the way downtown does, or other places that are on the transit spine. So where there isn't that connectivity to other transportation amenities, I think we need different parking standards. I think depending on the connectivity to the transit system.
I think you could do like a radius from each of our transit hubs, at least the downtown. There would be a radius, and then I don't know about Annapolis, but just because there's less development potential over there, and say that anything within a half mile of this has this other set of standards.
I think within the studies too, let's look for like jurisdictions. We're still pretty rural in feel, and so I don't think some of the studies as we get into some of the more urban areas probably would be totally applicable to us. I mean, there's probably a hybrid in there somewhere.
I'm not sure all the standards would apply. As wonderful as transit is, it doesn't cover every street and every neighborhood. So if you've got close proximity to some of those pedestrian amenities, whether it's transit or the pedestrian waterway, then you could potentially get some kind of a credit.
Right.
I know we're off topic, but how often do you get requests for deviations from the parking requirements?
For the commercial development activity that we see, which is typically where we get the request, maybe like 1 or 2% of the projects will ask for something, and a lot of times it's because it's at least in part because their site doesn't lend itself well, and
Right.
they can demonstrate that they have a lesser demand. And
Right.
usually it's driven more by challenges with the site than it is by their concern about providing too much parking.
Right. Okay. I think that's a good provision to have in any case, regardless of where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, are we on to the second item? McCormick Village Park change order?
Yeah, so this is a good news, bad news change order. Our engineers who are out designing the park, which we're at about 90% plans for site development, but the engineer who's doing the bridge, who's a sub-consultant, they went out and did their geotechnical analysis on the soils to get across the wetland at the north end or the south end of the park, and they determined that the soils are way too poor for supporting a bridge abutment. They would have to over-excavate and replace soils in order to support any sort of pedestrian bridge foundation. And at that point, that means they have to have a wider span because they can't dig right up adjacent to the wetlands. Basically, what they've determined is that going to a boardwalk, a shorter boardwalk than what was in the initial plan. Initially, we had a 400-foot boardwalk and determined that a 120-foot bridge would be a better option. And now they're saying, well, let's do a 120-foot or a shorter. I think it's even a 60-foot boardwalk, and we can save about $40,000 on construction costs, $40,000 to $50,000 on construction costs. But we have to go backwards a little bit on design because we already had gone down the path of building a second bridge. And if you'll recall, there's already going to be a bridge where the existing culvert is across the creek. And so we were going to just order two of the same bridge because the span length worked and it was going to create some efficiency on the design costs. But that efficiency has been lost, and we've determined that a boardwalk now that we have all the wetlands delineated, the boardwalk is going to be the more cost-effective option. So it's spent $15,000 now to save $40,000 to $50,000 in construction.
Okay, and then there's
Is there anything
JARPA.
they can do to instill our confidence that that $40,000 to $50,000 savings will actually occur?
Well, they put together an engineer's estimate, which typically builds in a factor, of a certain percentage that they think that this is a safe estimate. I think a lot of times when somebody is bidding on something, they're going to rely at least to an extent on the engineer's estimate, and they're going to go get quantity estimates and look at their labor costs, but typically they try to come in below engineer's estimates on a contract like this. I am assured that this will be the last change order, but
Okay, good with the bad?
yep.
Or bad with the good?
So this will come forward next Tuesday. I just wanted to let some of the council members know about it ahead of time so that you knew what this was all about.
And you'll talk a little bit more about JARPA and design specs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and the JARPA issue, really, they had already just started. They had almost completed their JARPA application based on a bridge, and so now they're going back and having to redo that application for a boardwalk. And so it's just, it's more hours and backtracking a little bit because of the design change.
Okay. Item 3, the Old Clifton Road industrial properties.
Okay, and this is something that we had a meeting last week, Mark and I forget who else was in the meeting, but we learned that we have a situation that is, they didn't ask us to take this to the land use committee. I'm taking this to the land use committee because I see something that's potentially wrong, and council potentially could choose to interject itself and potentially make something that at least I see as make it right. The creek that you see running through the properties that are marked with a B and a D on this map is a pretty good sized ravine, and essentially to access the properties to the west side of the creek from Old Clifton Road would require the construction of a bridge, which is a non-starter for most anything that would happen out here. The lots on the west side of the creek have access from a private road that's in the county. However, that private road is restricted to residential uses only. Property is zoned industrial. And so basically you have a situation where we have a bunch of lots that don't have utilities, that don't have legal access, and that are zoned in such a way that essentially requires a bridge to be constructed through critical areas and a stream corridor. The ownership is a checkerboard. The B and the D refer to the two different owners, and so it's a patchwork of ownership between two guys. One guy has no interest in developing and bought this as something to pass on to his kids, and he thinks it's great to have industrial property. The other guy is a guy who bought something hoping that he would be able to develop, and is finding out that he's totally stuck on the property, and especially given that the other owner isn't interested in selling or doing anything. He's just sort of stuck holding the property that he's paying taxes on, and he can't possibly do anything with. He
Which
does
one,
have
B or D is interested in developing? Which one?
D.
D is interested in developing?
D is interested in developing,
Go down.
and so I didn't want to use names, but cats out the back. Anyway, the properties on Old Clifton probably could stay industrial, and that's not a huge issue, but the properties on the west side of the stream, it seems to me, probably ought to be residential because their only existing access is off of a residential private road easement.
That's dirty? What's
Yeah.
is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
How do you
And so there's an easement through that lot then?
There's an easement through that lot, and I believe it does something like this through here, where it comes down and provides access to these lots.
Okay.
And then dead ends. And so, given that it's a private road, he would still have the burden of getting fire flow out there if he wanted to do something in terms of residential development, but putting a water line across this creek on either some sort of elevated, support structure or underground is a whole lot cheaper than building a bridge that would hold a vehicle. But anyway, because the one owner is not interested in initiating anything, bringing forward a comp plan amendment that would change half the properties out here to residential and leave the other half as industrial, it doesn't provide logical boundaries. It would be a patchwork of zoning. It's really something that doesn't make sense to go halfway on. It really needs to be an all or nothing scenario, and if it's going to be an all scenario, in the absence of both property owners requesting it, it would need to come from the city council as an initiated change. So I just wanted to put it out there that this situation exists and that we're not likely to see industrial development on the west side of that creek because of access, and we don't need to do anything, but we have, we always have the opportunity to do something.
And the landowners would be okay with that?
Well, the one landowner would be okay with it. The other one isn't interested in it, but if it's a city council initiated thing, it's
So it's not possible to access that parcel through the industrial park?
no. The grade is. You're talking about the rock quarry. The quarry is back there, and it's a pretty big bank, I believe.
Do you know if when they acquired it, whether it was industrial or residential?
I believe it's been industrial for quite a while.
Okay.
I think that when it was zoned, it made sense because this is the only piece of UGA and it's adjacent to our industrial park, but I don't think anybody looked at the critical areas or the difficulty of accessing it or the fact that the private road on the backside has a restriction that doesn't allow commercial access or industrial access.
If we were to change this to residential, would that have any kind of an impact on the city's industrial property?
I don't think so. I think that, the whole perimeter of the industrial park is pretty, you've got vegetation and a pretty good setback from the property lines to where the actual development exists. I don't think that future residents that would live in here are going to be affected by what goes on in the industrial park.
Yeah, that would be the concern is, let's say you build a housing development, something industrial is going on over here.
That's the reason for my question is if something in what is designated as industrial was to be developed, is it going to be hindered or whatever by residential right next to it?
Yeah, and we could certainly go out. This is really just an exploratory discussion. We would obviously look into detail a whole lot more if this committee is interested in pursuing that and potentially sponsoring that as an amendment. This is just the first step, is to bring it to your attention, and if you want us to go find more information or do more evaluation of it, we're happy to do that, but we didn't want to put a whole lot of effort.
Which one was it developed? I'm sorry, D or B?
D, yeah.
What are the, excuse me, what are the lot sizes? I know they're all different sizes, but typically around, do you have a sense for that?
I think those are 1 acre plus lot sizes, and so, you know, there was talk about potentially further subdivision. If they brought water and sewer out there, they'd be able to put in potentially quite a few more houses out in this area compared to the number of lots that are there now. But, you know, this may be a situation where you have an owner who just wants to cut his losses and be able to do something with the property as opposed to just losing money on it.
Nick, so how is access obtained for this parcel?
Right. So first we said we couldn't, there's no way we could get a road from the industrial park to these parcels.
Did you
But
see
now
our
we're
water?
concerned about future development coming down in there close to these home sites, which would mean we have to get a road down there.
Say that again? Sorry.
How would this develop?
Right.
That has access internal to the industrial park.
So if you're here, why can't you get to here?
Why couldn't we put a road in there and keep it industrial? Come at it from that direction.
You could, but this person is essentially stuck until something happens on property they don't control.
Access at this time.
Yeah, they
that
don't.
direction.
There is no access, and it would be dependent on. And I don't know. I don't know if this is city property or if this is.
That water tower is definitely.
Our water
Yeah.
tank is up there.
Yeah, I think this is, and the decant facility is on the parcel just adjacent to that.
This,
So
I think this whole area right
I suppose that would be another option. Would be to look at.
is this our parcel and our landfill?
Might be.
I think this section right here is the landfill area. This section is where the water tower is.
Because it's evergreen lumber there.
Yeah. So we built the decant facility here, and I don't know what the terrain is through there, but that would be another option. Would be potentially looking at extending an easement that would allow somebody to construct a road access.
I mean, it's already, it looks like there's a kind of a road already started.
Because of our water tower.
Yeah, dead ends at the
More
decant
sense if
facility.
we kept it industrial if this is all industrial.
Yeah, I just keep harkening back to what impact it's going to have on the city. We have our shooting range up there, and I can't imagine that being next to a residential area is going to be well received.
Mhm.
We've got our,
That is the water tower.
it's that,
Probably that spot right there.
it's that cleared area just below the water tower is where the police shooting range is. The water tank.
Interesting route, if you were to buy a home back in here, my goodness, you're going.
Yeah.
So barring access from the north and keeping it industrial would mean that you'd have industrial traffic exiting and entering through rural residential.
No,
Which-
we create an access point. Here is what we're talking about.
But, okay, we own this property?
Some of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's part of the old landfill.
It's the landfill.
So
Okay.
I think that's the other challenge is building a road across an old landfill is probably not as cheap as building a road across
Right.
other property.
I don't think it would be, well,
I think we need more information.
yeah.
Yeah.
But, from everything that I know about it, the best thing you can do to a landfill is cap it with impervious surfaces, so.
Mhm.
Or dig it out, I suppose.
So we can.
Would those two be willing to collaborate on a subdivision, do you know?
It doesn't sound like, it sounds like the owner B is not interested in developing. He's just interested in passing this to his
Right.
kids.
Doesn't want any-
And
no
he likes
impact.
the idea that he owns industrial property is how it was explained to me.
Sounds like someone didn't do their due diligence very well.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know that, I'm really comfortable with just kind of changing something in the middle of nothing.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah,
kind
I
of, it's
agree.
poor planning.
Well, we can talk to Public Works about the possibility of a road easement going through here, or looking at this from an access standpoint and say, hey, is there something we can do to dedicate this as a right-of-way to provide that access?
And that would
And-
be consistent with what they're trying to accomplish there and with all the other stuff that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Together our range for our water tower.
So if they were to use, is it Durfee or Dirty?
Not sure.
Okay. Where does that road come back into?
It goes out onto Anderson Hill Road.
Okay. So that would be okay.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a potential docketing of this?
That's one option.
Yeah, okay.
But we met with the guy, I think he's met with Mark once a year for the last 8 years, and every time he just ends up stuck. And so this is the first year that I sat in on one of those meetings, and I just,
Jersey paved that all the way back there? Or
I don't
that
know.
dirt road?
I haven't been out there.
I think there's gonna be significant infrastructure to make that all happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, did you get direction?
Yeah, it sounds like we need to look at we need to do
Look
some
at
further
it, right.
evaluation of
Okay.
alternatives, and we'll look at potential access from the north.
I think that's the right question to ask is, if there is contiguous property from industrial to industrial, what does it look like in the future to have a road? It seems to be the natural ingress.
It's our property, we grant an easement.
We need a
And
road there anyway if this is gonna continue to develop out, so it would be
I
mutually
don't
beneficial.
know that ours is developable. This could be I think this is the landfill, and one of the things we're talking about there is a park and ride lot, but there could be an opportunity.
Where's your land?
Well, without being,
It's in here,
I believe that the landfill is in this portion here,
down there.
down at this part. This is the lower part where we go up. Right about in here is where the new decamp facility is, and the road kind of turns and goes up to the water tank, which is
So in
outside of
the
the
landfill's in the stream then.
Yeah, the stream goes right through the middle.
yeah, I
of the
think it's
landfill.
piped. Oh, is it open or is it piped?
No, it's piped,
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
which is a real concern if that pipe ever breaks or gets plugged. There's
Yeah,
a
they've
big
got one of those
reservoir
bores.
right here on this side of the pipe because it goes down quite a ways.
Hmm.
Okay. Anything else on that? CAO update or revisions?
Carrie, you wanna?
Yeah, the city is required to update its critical areas ordinance normally on the same schedule as the comp plan update. We just adopted the comp plan this year. The state gave everybody an additional year extension to do the critical areas ordinance update. So this is something the city's been working on a little more slowly than the comp plan, but we had hired a consultant in 2015 to prepare a draft update. And we've sent that out now to all of the state reviewing agencies and the Suquamish tribe. We've received comments back. It looks to be in pretty good shape according to everyone, and so we've incorporated that into a second review draft document. It's gone to Sarah for legal review. I should have her comments hopefully back by the end of this week. At that point, and we haven't really talked about it, but I think it would be a good idea to send that out maybe for a 30-day review to the comp plan interested parties list and other people who would have a stake in any changes that are being proposed to it. There are some changes at the state level to water typing for streams and for wetland buffers, a few other things, but those are the big ones. And so I imagine some people out there in the development community will have something to say about that. So I'd like to get that feedback before we take it to Planning Commission or any further. If we proceed in that schedule, we can incorporate comments from the public, any other changes, hopefully by the end of November. And then we would be able to do our SEPA determination and take it, to the Planning Commission for a public hearing. I'm assuming at some point the Land Use Committee would like to see a draft of it or have a presentation on it, just to keep up with what's going on. But
I'm
we,
wondering if that isn't something that the entire council should look at in work study.
would you like that to happen before a Planning Commission hearing?
Our feelings, what do you think that that's something that's going to be potentially controversial and the whole council should have a chance to kind of look at it?
Yeah, I don't think it matters if we see it before or after, but I think that it would be extremely important to listen to that feedback once that public hearing happens. That's a huge piece of it.
We're going to be constrained on how much we can really change because the water typing is the water typing. The recommended buffers for wetlands and for streams, there's some flexibility probably on there. I would say that what we're proposing is neither very conservative nor very liberal, so it's kind of trying to just strike that balance.
I see benefit to having a public hearing before it comes to the work studies, so that you can have those comments and then start to massage it based on the comments.
Okay.
So I think maybe, I know we have probably a pretty big item on the January work study meeting because we're going to have to update our development regulations because our interim codes are expiring. But maybe in the February of next year would be a good time to have completed the planning commission process and take it to council work study.
So maybe take it to planning commission in January and
Yeah.
then bring it to the council work study in February. And then there'll be there could be changes to it, and then probably a second public hearing at the council.
Yeah, and you can always, we don't have to have this done by until June 30th, but you could adopt it in April with an effective date of June 30th if you want to wait as long as possible to have this take effect, or if you don't see harm in having it take effect sooner, you can take that action. But
Sounds like a plan.
all right.
Great, thank you.
Anything else for the good of the order?
No.
I think that's it.
All right. Wow, how about that?
You made it.
Good job, Chairman.
All right, we'll adjourn at 8 o'clock sharp. I know the county's gone through its